All right, good evening. Yes, thank you for coming out this evening. We're going to spend the evening with Dr. Frank Smith, who is the Executive Director for the African American Civil War Memorial and Museum in Washington, D.C. I'd just like to take a moment just to kind of thank you for coming and kind of let you know also some of the things that are going on as well. This evening we're at Mount Sinai Missionary Baptist Church in Fayetteville, North Carolina, right across the street from Fayetteville State University. Along the walls here in our space, there are actually panels where we're looking at and seeing what the upcoming and soon to be North Carolina Civil War Emancipation, and well, let me get the exact title right. They've changed it a few times. It's the North Carolina History Center on the Civil War, Emancipation, and Reconstruction. Those are that particular institution is very akin to the work that Dr. Frank Smith does at his institution in D.C., which is looking at the Civil War particularly from the African American experience. So without much further introduction, I would like to bring up to you Dr. Frank Smith.
Let me hold the mic. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I want to start out by saying that I stand here tonight in memory of my good friend, Harry Jones, who some of you all met. How many of you all met Harry when he was here that night? That's good. Excellent. You all know that this was the last speech, the last public appearance that Harry made before he came home tired and weary, fell asleep in the home of his loved ones, and woke up in the bosom of the angels. He passed away in his sleep, having done a great night's work here, having done his best to get Fayetteville, North Carolina, and this museum off the ground. And I'm happy to see all of the good things that have happened. And I'm the grandson of a Baptist preacher and a recovering politician. So let me just say that I'm going to give Harry credit for the fact that you all were able to obtain almost $60 million in funding for a museum here that he gave birth to with his ideas and his enthusiasm. So I want to pause for a minute and for a moment of silence in memory of a comrade and a friend who was a passionate lover of history and a motivator of people, Harry Jones. Amen. Thank you very much. I am here tonight to talk to you a little bit about the African American Civil War Museum, and I recognize the fact that Harry has been here already and has told you some of what you may hear from me tonight, but you'll hear a little bit different. Harry was a warrior whose job was to travel around sort of breaking ground for things that we were doing back in Washington, D.C. My job was to put the whole thing together and to make it work in a way that made sense to everybody. And I want to tell you a little bit about that because you're going through some of that right now as I look around this room at what you're trying to do here. We are in the process of doing some of that ourselves, but we have operated a museum for the past 20 years, and now we are expanding it, tripling its size, putting in new exhibits, and making it a much more appealing exhibit in a neighborhood in Washington, D.C. And this gentleman here was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and he will tell you, he can bear witness to the fact that we have revitalized U Street from the days from the time when it was ravaged by the riots of 1968, when it was torn apart, what was once known as Black Broadway, one of the most appealing black communities in the country, with probably the largest black middle class in the country, around U Street area, that was devastated by the riots of 1968. And then it will become my responsibility some years later as a city council member who represented that area to try to figure out how we were going to rebuild it. So when you live in Washington, D.C., there are monuments and museums everywhere. There's 350 museums in Washington, D.C. I don't know how many monuments. Some of those museums are bigger than others, and some of them are better than others. And we're not the biggest, but we are one of the best. We are one of the best. We know that. We've been We've been given that honor by many, many magazines and articles and other things in Washington, D.C., because we captured a story that was unknown and unheard of and untold, and still, to some extent, unbelieved by some people when we tell it the way we tell it. Because we tell the story of a people who were enslaved in the United States for all of these many years, and who were given an opportunity that would come a time when President Abraham Lincoln would get himself involved in a war that he could not win without doing something about slavery. He could not win it. We know he could not win it because we have his words, his own words, where he said, if I could win this war without doing something about slavery, I would do that. If I could win it by freeing some and not freeing others, I would do that. But whatever I do about slavery, I do it because I have to do it as a military necessity in order to win this war. And so there will come a time when he would have to do the Emancipation Proclamation, which has in it a paragraph number 8 that says persons of suitable condition will be enlisted in the Union Army. And as historian George Washington Williams would say, when the Bureau of U.S. Colored Troops had finally recruited these 200,000 African-American soldiers, 150,000 of which had been enslaved when the war started. 150,000 of them were enslaved. Some of them enslaved here in the great state of North Carolina. Some of them enslaved in my home state of Georgia. 150,000 were enslaved when the war started. George Washington Williams would say he created the largest standing army in the history of the world. Now, I have studied this. I have looked around Africa, and I've looked around Europe and other places to see that if there were any armies that we know in recorded history, bigger, black armies, bigger than this army of 200,000 African Americans. It's a big number. It's scary when you think about it. I'll tell you how scary it is. When Sherman's army marched on the city of Atlanta, Georgia, the city of Atlanta had 26,000 people in it. Sherman had 60,000. Now our records say that Sherman had 60,000 men in his army. When I was a consultant to the city of Atlanta, I asked them, what do they say down there at the National Atlanta History Museum about how many soldiers Sherman had in his army? They said Sherman had 110,000. Now, put a pin in that, y'all, because these stories depend upon who's telling them. Y'all know that, right? And if you're trying to describe yourself as the lost cause you were defeated by this huge Northern army that ran over all of you, well, 110,000 sounds bigger than 60,000. And it might be that if you heard, if they were, hey, the army was 25 miles wide, it was, 15 or 20 miles long, so it might have looked like 110,000. But I can tell you what, it was 5 times the size of the city of Atlanta. So people were getting out of the way of this army because it was a mighty moving force. And by the time it came here, it was at the end of it was in the mop-up part of its operation. And as that army proceeded from the northern part of Atlanta, northern part of the state of Georgia, south toward Atlanta and Savannah, at the time that the army entered Georgia from Tennessee, there were approximately 1 million people in the whole state of Georgia, including enslaved people. 440,000 of those people were blacks. They were enslaved. They were living on those plantations. My family was one of those family members living on those plantations just south of Atlanta in Coweta County, Georgia, that was freed by this army. As that army moved south, those people were freed. And one of those families that was freed, family members that was freed coming north, aside from my own family, was the family member of Michelle Obama, who had migrated there from the state of South Carolina. Was sold, actually, wasn't sold. She was donated to her relative, to a relative of a plantation owner who lived in North Georgia. And she just happened to be living there as a 15-year-old at the time that army started to march south. So that army would be the army that would liberate the black community of Georgia and Alabama, and then eventually come up through the Carolinas and end up here someplace not far from here where Johnston would surrender to Sherman, and the war would be officially over. And then Congress would pass the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, the 14th Amendment, which made African American citizens, and the 15th Amendment, which gave African Americans the right to vote. And you and I know that during this period of Reconstruction, African Americans get elected to many offices around the country, including the state of Mississippi, which has 2 senators who were elected to the United States Senate from the state of Mississippi. And we also know that the horror stories that happen of black elected officials, one of which takes place here in Wilmington, North Carolina, as the whole government is eventually surrounded and a mob kills off all of those people, running them out of office, which officially, as some people say it officially ended the period of black Reconstruction here in Wilmington, North Carolina. So we came through that whole period, and your exhibit and your museum, my museum, doesn't stop there. We take up this period of Reconstruction, and we say something about this period at our museum that has to be said, and that is that although, and I've seen this from some historians, that said that African Americans were worse off after Reconstruction than they were as slaves. I was on a panel one time, usually a very civil, I'm a Morehouse College grad. I've been in politics a long time. I know how to be. I'm the chairman of the trustee board of my church. I know how to act. But I was on a panel one time in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where a man got up and said that, and I just couldn't sit down anymore, Reverend. I had to get up. I interrupted him. I said, you're trying to tell us that African Americans were better off after this period were worse off after this period of Reconstruction than they were being beaten and mobbed and raped, pillaged as slaves? I can't imagine an African American ever saying that. Besides, by the time we get to 1890, there's 100 black colleges in the United States. This college right behind us here somewhere, Fayetteville State, was created in 1867. I went to Morehouse College, which was created in 1867. Right up the street from me, Howard University, the largest black college in the country. We've got 100 black colleges in the United States. Black people are graduating from college. They're starting businesses and churches and schools. And one writer says schools are breaking out like wildflowers. And he describes a school, Reverend, he describes a school as anywhere where 3 people gather together and one of them can read and write. That sounds like a church to me. That's why that's how he describes the school. So when these young people complain that they don't have any air conditioning or the food's not right, I say to myself, that must not be no school, because I grew up on a school in Newnan, Georgia. I walked to a church school called St. John Baptist Church School. We had one teacher who taught all 7 grades. Now the white people had a school. They had a school bus. I walked to school every day. I know I walked to school every day because the school bus used to pass. And my sister, who died last year, my older sister died 2 years ago, told me that if it hadn't been for her, I would have been dead in the ditch, because I didn't have sense enough to get off the road when the cars came. She said, if I hadn't pushed you in that ditch, you would have got killed by somebody by now. You think you're somebody. You wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for me. So when I write my book, I'm going to have a chapter called Dead in the Ditch. Named for my sister Gussie, who kept me alive all those years by pushing me down in the ditch so I wouldn't get killed trying to get to that St. John Baptist Church School. But I did all right. I did all right at St. John Baptist Church School. I finished high school at the top of my class with the Morehouse. Joined the Civil Rights Movement and went to Mississippi after 3 years. My folks thought I had lost my mind, but I eventually cleaned that up for them. And I finished school and got a PhD. So they thought it came out all right. They just didn't like the way it looked when I was going. They thought I had lost my mind, but somebody had to do that. But let me also add one last thing, and then I'm going to let Marquette say a few words about this, because I just turned 80 last week, and I'm glad to be with you all. I'm glad to be anywhere after 80 years of walking to school and not getting thrown in the ditch and being in and out of some of the best jails in Mississippi. And I'd never been arrested in North Carolina, but in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, some other places, in the Civil Rights Movement. And then I spent 16 years as a council member in Washington, D.C. And that's combat duty also. To be honest with you, back in the days when I was there, it was combat duty, I'll tell you right now, which is the reason why we ended up trying to build this museum on U Street, because that the whole city got torn up with the riots of 1968, and we tried to figure out how to rebuild it. Our way to rebuild it was to build a museum. And so we went into the archives and pulled out all these records, put these names up, built this really wonderful piece of sculpture out there, and eventually built a museum that creates all these records. But listen, my granddad, who was a Baptist preacher, would say that talking about history is just telling old stories if you don't find out some way to make it relevant to today. So let me make this Civil War story relevant to black people for today and relevant to America for today. You've got a country that's really built on slavery, and following slavery, Jim Crow, where African Americans are just barred from certain jobs because of the color of their skin. Didn't matter whether you went to school or not, whether you comported yourself well, you were just barred from certain jobs. You couldn't get certain jobs. And it wasn't just true in the South, it was true in the federal government too, in Washington, D.C. People said Washington, D.C. used to have the most educated postal delivery service in the world. Black people go finish Howard University, they can get a job in the warehouse, they go to work at the post office delivering mail. Well, they couldn't do anything else. They had to work, they had to feed their families like everybody else. So they had to do what they had to do to make a living because we had families to take care of. And we always knew what I knew. And if you couldn't get one good job and make millions of meat, you had to take two piece of jobs and make a good job out of it. That's right. I remember when I had 3 jobs at one time. I had 2 children, a wife in medical school. I had to do something. I had to take care of my responsibilities. And so I worked hard. That's what I did. Tried to work smart, too. But let me just make one last point, and then I'm going to sit down. And that is this. If you want to know how important this whole business of slavery and emancipation, the end of slavery and the beginning of emancipation and liberation, and then eventually the civil rights movement was meant to the black community, I'll just give you 3 facts, and I'm going to sit down. When I went to college in 1960, there were only 250,000 black people in college in the whole United States of America. Most of us were in the South, too, by the way, because most of these schools were in the South. These 100 black colleges I talked about, all but 3 of them in the South. And Howard University was in Washington, D.C. That was slavery in Washington, too. But I'm going to count that one as northern school. Most of them were in the South. I was in one of those schools in Atlanta, 250,000 blacks in all of those schools combined. By the time Obama gets elected president of the United States, there's 2.5 million blacks enrolled in college in the United States. Now, if you want to know how well people are doing, we do this all the time. I do. How many of your kids going to college? How many of your grandkids going to college? That's why all of us are working so hard right now, trying to sacrifice, and that's why we're going to make this government do something about these student loans, too, because, you work hard and come out of school with all this. You ought to be able to buy a house and not have to bankrupt your family so you have a place to stay. So we'll do something about that. But the fact of the matter is you see a great increase. Now, let's go down to the next one, because these 2 things are tied together. In 1960, African Americans earned about $900 million a year in our total earnings, all of our cotton picking and stuff like that, what we do, all the 2-job families and all that stuff. By the time Obama runs for president, African Americans earned about $900 million. They earned $980 billion, and they have, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics says that figure would have gone over $1 trillion had it not been for employment discrimination. Now, in case y'all don't know what that is, employment discrimination means you have passed the requirements to get a job, and you're working just like everybody else. You just can't get promoted because of the color of your skin. You know what I'm saying? You can get a job at the post office delivering mail, but you can't get I don't care what kind of education you have, you can't go up the ladder because of the color of your skin. This is what the Bureau of Employment Security said that. And so in 1960, there's 700,000 African Americans registered to vote in the United States. And then after the Civil Rights Movement, y'all know we passed the 64 Civil Rights Act and the 65 Voting Rights Act. By the time Obama runs, there's 18 million black people registered to vote in the United States. Obama takes a look at that figure and says, I think I can get elected president. He was smart, went to Yale. He majored in economics, but he didn't major in mathematics. For him to get elected president, he needed 56 million votes. Now, having been elected a few times myself, I can tell you if you got 18 and you need 56, 18 is better than nothing. But it's not enough to get elected, Wolf. So how did he get elected president? He had to reach across the aisle to find enough people, enough whites, enough Hispanics, enough gays and others who were willing to judge him by the content of his character rather than the color of his skin. And so he gets elected not one time, but twice. And by the way, in case you think he got elected by accident the first time, the second time he got elected by more votes than he did the first time. That's right. I lived in Washington, D.C. for a long time. I've been up there since 1968. I've seen a lot of presidents. Some of it, don't think we don't, just because we watching now. We know everything go on around at the White House. We wash the dishes and clean the clothes and take out the trash. We know what they eat for breakfast and how long they stay up and what time and who they're running around with. We ain't seen some of these presidents better than others. We saw President Nixon get, all kind of stuff happen to him. And before Nixon, by the way, he had a vice president named Spiro Agnew. Spiro Agnew was taking money in the White House in paper bags. Bill Clinton was carrying on up there with all, I've seen a lot of presidents. The Obama presidency was the most exemplary president I've ever seen since I've been in Washington, D.C. There's never a scandal associated with them. Never a story about their kids cutting up, doing all kind of things. Now, I got 3 children. They don't always do the right thing. Mostly they do. Don't finna out my children down here. But that's a good story that I think we can tell about America. This country has changed. As Dr. King said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And I believe, as I stand here tonight in your presence, Reverend, in your church, I believe that this country has changed. The moral arc of the universe has gone in a direction now it will never turn back. Despite all the noise that you hear in the press now and all the things that you see about this country turning its back on voting rights and all these other things, I think that's all something that America has seen. It's in the rearview mirror now. It never want to go back there again, and it never will go back there again. We passed that one time, and it will never happen again. So I want to bring that good news to you down here as you put your museum together and say you've got a chance to do some good things with it, some great news that I think will contribute to these great notions of freedom and democracy that have been the hallmark of the United States of America. That's the story that we have here that we can spread around this world. All over the world, people are looking to us for that. In Africa and in Asia and in Europe, everywhere else, they're looking to America for that. We can stand up for those principles. We've earned the right to it. We've taken care of some of those issues that are in our past that will never come up again here in the United States. I want to thank you for that. May God continue to bless America, and may God continue to bless all of you. All right, now, thank you all. Thank you very much. Now, before I sit down, though, I want you to meet the soldier. I brought this young man with me because I want you to meet him. His real name is Marquette Milton. But for us, and this is one of the things that I do at my museum, everybody has a role. You met Harry. Marquette has a role, too. Marquette's role is to take a soldier and learn everything he can about him. Everything. And talk about it. Tell you about it. Introduce you to him. He's about the same age as what these guys were. They were all slightly built, by the way. The average size of a soldier was about 5'6". He's a little bit about that age, about that size, and he is also about the right age. He found a person that looked like him. It took a long time research to find him, and he's going to tell you a story about him because this is something you can do at your museum that will bring these stories alive so people can see them and see who these people were. These were real people who had real lives, and they carried real weapons into battle, and many of them, like this young fellow, came back home. 80% of them came back home, and they started families, and they had a life. So Marquette's going to walk you through the story of one of these soldiers in 5 minutes. Marquette.
So I'd like to thank you all for inviting me and Dr. Smith to speak about the museum, but also the untold story about men of African descent that put on this uniform and fought for their freedom. So I'm going to start telling you my story. It's Andrew Green. Andrew Green was born and raised in Washington, D.C. between the years 1840s, 1842. And he was owned by a woman named Isabel James. And so Isabel James was actually confiscated, given money, $300 for his freedom, because D.C. was the first to emancipate African Americans before the Emancipation Proclamation. Our day is April 16, 1862, and there was a contraband camp just north of downtown Washington, D.C., called Camp Barker. Today it's laid between R and S Street. It's an elementary school today, and they do have information on the history about the camp, and also so it's a museum. Now, in 1863, after the proclamation was issued, they established the Bureau of United States Colored Troops, General Order 143. And just to happen, there was a AME church just south of the U.S. Capitol, and there was a minister, go by the name Henry McNeil Turner, will use this church as a recruiting station. And so there was General Birney and others that were recruiting African America along the district. And they were also getting men from like the Silver Spring area, Montgomery County, and also across the river, Old Town Alexandria. And they raised about 5 companies. Downtown, which is F Street today, was a camp. So they had tents and everything. The men were issued their uniforms. They were not issued their weapons yet. But at the same time they were marching on parade detail, there were street gangs throwing rocks at them. And so there was a big fight. And one of the comrades, his name was Sergeant Ross. And he was fighting all the men that was starting to fight and picking on them. And because of all the fights and stuff, they moved the 1st Regiment to Mason's Island, which is today's Theodore Roosevelt Island today. They spent 2 months in the camp. Afterwards, in August of 1863, they were signed to General Wild. General Wild was the same general that was here in North Carolina that was authorized to raise a brigade of colored soldiers. He raised about 5,000. And so he actually commanded other regiments besides the North Carolina regiments. The 5th Colored Infantry from Ohio. He had the 1st Colored Infantry from D.C. He had the 1st and 2nd North Carolina Colored Infantry, and also a light artillery from New York. And they were part of the South Mills expedition. They took control of Norfolk, Virginia, Portsmouth, Elizabeth City. And next thing you know, there's street gangs, these guerrillas, sabotaging, hit and run. And so General Wild wanted to get an end to this. In fact, he was sort of the first general to adopt a new warfare, total war. And so he had an expedition to find out where they live. So they found out their homes, they destroyed them, they took their livestock, they took the families, and they found these rebels. And so most all the men that was part of that guerrilla fighting, they were captured. The ones that escaped went into the Confederation lines. But the expedition was successful, and the regiments went to other departments in the war. 1st Colored Infantry, along with the 37, was down in a part of the Army of the James. They were part of the Petersburg-Richmond campaign. In fact, the 37 Colored Infantry was also led by Colonel Holman, which led the 22nd and the 1st Colored Infantry. They're in the battle called New Market Heights, where you had 14 African Americans awarded Congressional Medal of Honor. In fact, before the battle, there was 26,600 men charged in full speed under fire. When the officers were down, the non-commissioned officers would take charge and continue on mission. These non-commissioned officers, soldiers, took charge, and they set an example of leadership. Now, in 1865, they're in Fort Fisher. 1st Colored Infantry, we camped out on the beach. There was a attack. We captured a couple of Confederates. About 50 of them was captured. A couple weeks later, Fort Fisher was taken. In fact, the 1st Colored Infantry, we were among the first soldiers that captured Wilmington. Now, there were other places that they patrolled and they policed, because these times soldiers occupying cities and towns, they doing something called provosts, which is military police. And a lot of folks in the South did not like colored soldiers telling them what to do. And so it was good to have the officer around because they can force the law. Well, now my story, when I was in North Carolina, Wilmington, I met this beautiful lady named Isabel Williams. And so my regiment was mustered out of September of 1865. By then, the war was over. A lot of soldiers were sent to Texas. And then you'll see soldiers policing other parts of the South. But 700 men, including myself, made it back to Washington, D.C. And the woman I brought with me, Isabel, we get married on December 26, 1865. And so we got married, and the money that I saved, I used that to own my own cater company. See, after the war, a lot of soldiers like myself, we ran our own business. We built our own homes. We put ourselves in school, and we put our children in school. And before I pass the mic, I just want to let you know good facts about North Carolina, that in 1860 census, you had over 300,000 persons of African descent in the state, but only over 30,000 were free, and 5,000 volunteer in the state of North Carolina. And so I'm proud to represent a regiment that was here in North Carolina that's part of the history. In fact, I also learned that the 1st Colored Infantry was also attached with Sherman, forcing Confederate General Johnson to surrender. So that's also a history that needs to be told here. And so I thank you all for letting me speak here, and I'm going to pass the mic. And if you have any questions, I'm here available for you. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to switch over to a more conversational style at the other table. So those of you on Zoom, the cameras will be off for a moment, and we'll be right back with you in a second. The joy of adaptation.
It's a commercial break.
That's what happens when you technology is always interesting. When we do some questions from the audience, you all can come up to the mic, and you'll end up on the Zoom too if you want to come up and ask a question. Okay, we are back, and Dr. Frank Smith is now seated with John Caldwell, who's joining us, and we'll be asking him some questions, just getting some of his thoughts on what his life has been and how he's been instrumental in getting youth to engage in a lot of the issues going on in our society. So, John?
Well, first I want to say I appreciate you coming down here to talk to us and share with us your journey and delivering the message to Fayetteville here at Mount Sinai. One of the things that you didn't get a chance to speak to, but I would hope that you would share, is your experience with SNCC, which is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We have some Fayetteville State students in the audience. Could y'all raise your hands up for a moment? So we have a couple of students here. And we have William Evans, who's there. He's the president of the NACP for Fayetteville State University. He's also involved with the Greater Diversity News, and there he's working diligently to organize a black student movement of sorts. What would you say to him? What would you give him? What kind of advice? I don't want to use the word advice, but what would you share with him? Or what could you share with him about your experience in being one of the founding members of SNCC here in Shaw? And if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, as a matter of fact, SNCC was actually founded in North Carolina at Shaw University. I was a student at Morehouse. I was one of the leaders of the Atlanta Civil Rights Movement there, and I came to the first meeting here. And you probably also know that originally SNCC was going to be a junior partner of Dr. King's SCLC. we had a meeting there on the campus held in one of the buildings there on the campus over the Easter holidays at Shaw, and Dr. King and his minister partners were there, Abernathy and I think Andy Young and others. They invited a bunch of students, about 40 or 50 of us, and they spoke for about 3 hours, and we finally got a chance to raise a hand and say, can we be excused for a minute? We went outside and kept going. We said we want to have our own organization. We can't be no part of that. We want freedom now. We don't want freedom next week. And so we were just a bunch of young students. I think I was 20 years old, maybe 21 at the time. But we were living in a world where, you know, you had to ride the back of the bus if you didn't want to go to jail, like Rosa Parks, or you couldn't, as I said earlier, couldn't work in certain jobs just because of the color of your skin. And, you know, we used to joke about if you were Morehouse, you go to Morehouse, but if you want to preach or teach, you couldn't do much else with your education because you were barred out of all over the jobs. So one of the things that we were doing was opening up the world so we could ourselves have a better future in terms of jobs, employment opportunities, and things like that. And what you see in education, I want to stick with that for a minute for young people, because there's two things are happening right now. Our historically black colleges are expanding. You all know that, right? Many of them now, over the last 20 years, the population going up a great deal. Morehouse College is talking about capping its population right now because they don't want to go much bigger than what they are now because it puts other pressures on the school. But if you go back to Mississippi, for example, today there's probably as many black students at Ole Miss as there is at Jackson State, because there's a large black population there at Ole Miss. In Atlanta, Georgia State University, which was segregated and white when I was there, last year Georgia State graduated more African American students than all of the black colleges combined. Morehouse, Spelman, Clark, AU, all of them. So there's been a great deal of progress in this area. This is one of the reasons why I say I don't think America can ever turn back. We've just gone too far, you all. This thing has just gone too far in this direction. There's no way it can be turned around. Now, are there some issues out there that need to be worked on? Yes. My folks still live in Georgia. I was down there a few weeks ago working in the Warnock campaign, sending money down there for him and for, what's her name? Stacy. Well, I can't vote down there, y'all, because I ain't going to jail. But I can send money, and I can make sure my folks are registered to vote, and make sure they vote. But I have a great fear that that some of these ballot boxes are going to be stolen. There are people, churches, that are scared to let them use their churches for polling places because they're scared the church is going to be bombed. So this fear, there's a palpable state of fear out there of violence that is almost as bad as it was when I was a civil rights worker. So now, what does that mean? That don't mean that you got to become a shrinking violent and say, I'm not going out there because I'm scared. Because if Rosa Parks had been scared, you'd still be riding the back of that bus. If Fannie Lou Hamer had been scared, sometimes you got to walk out there and take a chance. Now, we've got to get these voting, make sure people go out and vote. We got to make sure these votes are counted. And we got to make sure that these elections are certified and that people are able to do that. And that's a big issue I think young people can work on, because young people are notorious for not voting. Let me just say that out loud. We registered, Howard University was in my district when I was on the city council. We go over there and register 10,000 students. 200 of them will vote on election day. Young people are notorious for not voting, so y'all need to clean that up and vote yourself and make sure that you get your family members out. And also, go out and work some of these polls during the election day. You need to get out there yourself. Go out there and have that experience. And don't worry, the Lord's going to take care of you. Don't you, Reverend? Tell them. If you make one step, God will make two. Amen. Amen. If you don't have the faith, now it's hard to do it. But if you have the faith, and I'm a living proof that you can walk these dangerous highways, you can go through these jail ventures, you can have all kind of things and still live to be 80 years old, still take your nourishment at night. Watch your grandchildren go to college, great-grandchildren. One that's in a Navy SEAL right now. So yeah, you can still do this, and it's got to be done. It's your job. Thank you.
I'm gonna take another quick stab at this with the youth, and then before Demetrius asks his question, just a follow up. And if you can do it in a little shorter, it'd be helpful. Volunteer, and everybody in here, most of them that know me know I like to talk, so I get long with it. I hope they can appreciate this. The idea of you working with SNCC and starting out and being a part of SNCC when it first started, I know from looking forward, you probably couldn't imagine what you're doing now. But if you're talking to a young person, any person that's listening, the people we have on the Zoom, what would you say to them in terms of the intrinsic value that you got from doing that work, that volunteerism? I know your story as far as the amount of years you took off from school, that you talked about on the podium, you didn't go into detail, that your folks got worried about. Was you going to finish school because you was doing this other work? So that work that you did that we all benefit from today, that work that he was a part of, because you're a walking legend, and up in D.C. area you're known, and quite frankly across the country, not so much down here, that walk that you did, how has that shaped your life? How has it informed your life? How has it benefited your life? Why would you tell a young person today to do that work that you did so many years ago?
Okay, well, first of all, let me just say what I think most college students already know. College was the best years of my life, and the college is probably the best years of your life too. So hey, have at it. Have a good time. I can tell you this also. You're going to meet friends there that will be friends for the rest of your life. That's where you're going to meet your friends. My friends now, we have something called a SNCC Legacy Group. Those of us who are still alive talk to each other all the time. One of us just passed away down in Albany, Georgia, a guy named Charles Sherrod. I'm not going to get down there for the funeral, but somebody else is going to go and speak there. So we're still friends. Our children are friends, and our grandchildren are friends. So you're going to meet your friends there, your lovers, some of you get your person that you're going to marry. But also, you should form some relationships with people. This is really what made us friends. The fact that we all became friends because we volunteered to work in the civil rights movement. Now, you've got organizations like this on your campus now. You got you've got the NAACP. You got other chapters on your campus, the sororities and the fraternities. You do good work. Many of you already doing good work. You got to join something. It's hard to do things by yourself. If you join a church and then become active in the church, do something there to help the homeless people, to help get people to the polls on election day, to help take care of people who are hurt and battered and homeless and things like that. Join something. You need to do something to help yourself and to help your neighbors. That's a part of your civic responsibility. It's a part of your religious and moral responsibility also. And you start that while you're in school. And form some groups and your friends, and I promise you, you'll benefit from it for the rest of your life. And they'll be your friends. They'll stand by you when times are hard, and they'll pick you up when you get down and maybe get past you a glass of water every now and then if you get lonely. So have at it and have a good time. Enjoy yourself, but do something also to help others.
So I want to hear about the challenges you faced getting that facility started in D.C., your African American Civil War and Memorial and Museum. What are some of the challenges you faced in getting that started?
Okay, well, let me just say two things. One, it started out from the very beginning, and it had always been an economic development proposal. Now, cities and states and governments will spend money for economic development. Everybody knows you got to spend money to make money. It's hard to get them to spend money on good history and good art and good architecture and things like that. But if you can tie it up with something that they can see as a value, it makes it a little easier. And that didn't make it easy. Don't get me wrong about that. The fact was that we had to, and I remember I've been at this now since 1992. I told you, I've seen a lot of mayors, a lot of presidents, some of them better than others. I've seen a lot of mayors, too. And some of those mayors were better than others. And some of those mayors didn't have a clue. You know, we had a mayor named Marion Barry. You all know his name from all kind of good things. Marion Barry set the high standard and the low standard. People will make you forget about the high standard talking about the low standard. Marion Barry was the mayor when I first started this project. He was the one that got the first money for us to get it started, because he's the mayor. The mayors have more power than council members. That's why they all want to be mayors. But you know, it took working with other people, because the way the government works is that the council has 13 people on it. As one person, you got the right to speak. That's all you got the right, like everybody else, and you got one vote. But that one vote will not get anything done. You got to get 6 other people to help you in order for you to get something done. So, and there are all kind of ways those relationships develop. And but then it's up to when you get elected to these offices, it's your responsibility to figure out how to do something, not just to sit there and like a knot on the log. So one of my responsibilities was to convince the council that we ought to do this national monument, because that was the way to get tourists from all over the country to come to this neighborhood. And when they came, the most affluent and the most educated tourist in the world is a Civil War tourist. They stay twice as long as the average tourist, and they spend twice as much money. So if you were sitting down somewhere trying to figure out, well, if I want a tourist in my neighborhood, who do I want in my neighborhood? I can tell you right now, they kind of cantankerous, because they all think they know everything already before they get there. They all think they know. You're telling them that you're going to see something here you have never seen before. They get there and say, what is this? But so that was the first point, was to convince people that we ought to put the money up for this. And the second part then was to find something that was big enough so you could make it, get people to come from around other parts of the world and around the country to see it. And then the last thing was I had to make the neighborhood safe and clean. If you make it safe and clean for tourists, you make it safe and clean for the neighbors. So that's how you organize the neighbors to help you. Because once you get, you want to know how well this works, every year, twice a year, we have a cleanup in our neighborhood. We have 100 people who live in the neighborhood come out and clean up. Vermont Avenue is a wide street. It's 6 lanes wide, and it has a median down the middle, about as half as wide as this room. And we plant flowers and trees and stuff in there, all done by the neighbors. So we work all morning long, and then one of the restaurants invite us to dinner in the afternoon. So you got the neighbors involved in it too. So it's a project that lifts up the whole neighborhood. And it tells a story about a fight for freedom here in the United States. This is what this country is all about. It's what America is all about. And I think this story, and let me also add one last thing to this. It's a multicultural exhibit. We have 200,000 names. We have 150,000 names that were enslaved. All the white officers who commanded these soldiers, there were 7,800 officers. Their names are up there. There's about 1,500 Hispanic surnames on our wall. And we have something now that we call a list of celebrity descendants. We heard from 4,000 or 5,000 descendants. So we have celebrity descendants now. We have P. Diddy. He's a descendant. Help me out, Marquette. First Lady Michelle Obama. Chris Rock is a descendant. The lady that played in the movie Gone with the Wind, the black lady that was in Gone with the Wind. Hattie McDaniels is a descendant. We just learned that a few weeks ago. And then and the Duchess of Sussex. Anybody know who that is? She used to be the Duchess of Sussex. They resigned their what's her name? Meghan Markle. Meghan Markle is a descendant of a Civil War soldier. That's interesting. You know how we found that out? When she got engaged to Charles, the British tabloids did a background check on her. They dug all the way. They went all under the ground. They dug it up. And one day, one of my guys on staff, Ed was on the internet. He was surfing the internet, and he pulled the story up. She's a descendant of a soldier from Gadsden, Alabama. That's where her family started out. That's an interesting story, isn't it? And we're doing a special exhibit about First Lady Obama, called Michelle Obama, called From Slavery to the White House. Michelle Obama has a descendant on her mother's side, started out in Alabama. His name is on our wall. And on her father's side, started out down in South Carolina, your neighbor to the south. How do we know that? Because her family came in there on the day of the inauguration. 14 of her family members came to our museum. said they were descendants. And they're being invited to a special party when we have our opening. We're going to invite you all too, but when we have our opening, because our museum is under renovation now, and when we open back up in the spring next year, in the summer of next year, we're going to have a special showing for that for those family members first, and then it's going to be open to the public after that. This is interesting history, you all. This is good stuff that we're doing here. You're going to do some of it here too in Fayetteville, and I look forward to coming back and seeing your exhibits that you have here at your museum. Some of it is displayed on these walls in this room here tonight.
So I want to take the liberty of also mentioning that we have Sherry Moulter. Can you raise your hand for a second? So Sherry Moulter is on our team at the History Center, she collects the stories, vets the stories, and now she works with a young Fayetteville State graduate. They're working on a story of the cameraman back there. He wasn't planning on this. His relative is Samuel Bright, and we were able to call Dr. Smith up, and he was able to locate with his team the actual who he is and what panel he is on the wall up there in D.C. And I mention this to you because, as Dr. Smith just said, the actual museum will not be open until the spring or the summer of 2023, but the wall is there. So if you're in D.C., take time to go up there, and you'll meet, you can remind Marquette where you first met him at down here. But he's out there every day giving people the story, telling them what's going on. That's how me and my son met him, and that's how he wound up connecting us so that we could talk with Dr. Frank Smith, and he's real gracious with his time, and he took us a tour of his facility that's expanding from 5,000 square foot to he took us on a tour of his facility, and it's going to be 20,000 square foot, and it's going to start off with Michelle Obama, and it's going to end with Michelle Obama in terms of the story. It starts with the actual U.S. colored troops, but it's going to end in a place where it tells young people how to get involved. So I'm going to pass the mic to Demetrius.
Well, thank you. If anyone has any questions from the audience, we're going to actually come over. You can kind of line up, and then we'll bring the mic over. I'm going to actually be going back and forth so they can have the mic here and over there. So after you ask your question, I'll bring it back to this group, and you could repeat it just to make sure that.
Tell us your name.
Yes. Well, we don't know this person.
Good evening. I'm Peter Greer, Greater Diversity News, class of 1966 FSU. I got a call from North Carolina Central a week or two ago, and there's a team of students that are working to produce some type of SNCC legacy project. Of course, they asked us to sort of work with them, and we're happy to do so. But I went to the SNCC Legacy Project website. And on that site, the person that had the most recognition was Ella Baker. Tell us about Ella Baker.
So if I heard your question right, Peter, you want him to talk a little bit more about Ella Baker and what she meant to this movement. And anybody that gets this mic, turn it up to your mouth so we can hear it, because you hear how it sounds better than if you're talking like this. So I'm just letting y'all know so that everybody can pick it up, and especially because we're recording. So that's going to help the recording do this thing.
Okay, well, Ella Baker was a special person for us, for SNCC. Because she sort of straddled both sides. She was a friend of Dr. King. She'd known him for years before we met him, and she was actually on his staff. And she was the one she suggested to King that he meet with these leaders, various leaders for these local movements, the ones here in Greensboro and at various schools, including the ones in Atlanta where I was, and he tasked her with get in contact with us and bringing us to the Raleigh meeting. To the meeting there at Shaw, and then once we got there, she sort of said to us, "I don't think this is going to work. Y'all might want to go out. Y'all might want to go out on your own." I think she figured out and there was a reason for this, which was very interesting. We were young and probably more adventurous than Dr. King. He was only 10 years older than we were, but that looked like a big distance back in them days. Y'all know what I'm saying. I'm 80 now, so 27 and 28 didn't seem so old. Doesn't seem so old to me now. I mean, that's baby talk right there. But in those days, that seemed old. They were just too old for us. They were too slow and too old, and because we would do some things like in Atlanta, we would go to one place as a sit-in movement, and they would come in and read your rights. We learned that they had to read your rights to you 3 times before they put you in jail. So they read twice, and then you get up and move. So you go to the next restaurant. We call that hit and run. Well, we were trying to shut them down during lunchtime, because when lunchtime, you shut them down during lunchtime and dinner time, you didn't have to worry about the rest of the day, because wasn't nobody coming in there no way. Dr. King thought that was too aggressive. You just sooner or later, you got to make a deal with these people. You're going to make them so mad they ain't never going to like you. Well, I don't care if they like me or not. We're trying to shut this joint down if they don't want to hire no black people. See what I'm saying? So we need our own organization. We need our own organization. So it just wasn't going to work. And Ella Baker was smart enough. She was older than we were. She was older than Dr. King. But she knew that we needed to be on our own, and that we would. So we will always love her for that. She was, and I'll tell you one quick story about her. We were, when we started the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, y'all know this story about us going to the Democratic Convention, challenging the regular Democrats from the state of Mississippi who would not allow black people to register to vote. We registered 100,000 people in our own registration. We were rolling, you all. We set up our own voter registration form. They won't let you register. We'll register ourselves. And we took all those people to the National Convention and said, you need to throw these people out because they are racist. They don't represent America. We represent America. So my job, they sent me to Washington, D.C., first time I'd ever left the South, to travel around the country to help get states like Massachusetts and Oregon and other people to vote for SNCC, to vote for the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And Mrs. Baker, they sent Baker up there too because they knew we needed we needed one adult in the room anyway. So Ms. Baker was there. And so I suggested that we ought to get Dr. King. I said, you know what, we're going to go at the National Democratic Convention. He's the most popular person. Everybody knows him. Everybody respects him. You know Dr. King. You know, so Mrs. Baker was, first of all, she was surprised that I was suggesting that. She was surprised. But she said, now, Frank, if we do this, you know that when Dr. King walks in the room, all the press, everybody gonna go to him. Ain't nobody gonna ask you or Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer or anybody else what they think after he gets there. They're gonna all be asking him. If you want to do that, you can expect that's gonna happen. I said, but we gotta have this a big showdown. We can't leave our ace pitcher. I'm thinking baseball terms. This our Warren Spahn, our what's that black pitcher used to pitch, Satchel Paige. We got to put him on the mound. And so I remember we get to the Democratic Convention in Atlantic City. And Dr. King shows up. He comes down the hallway like he came through that door with his entourage. About him and about 50 cameras and television stuff like King. Dr. King said, well, you know, it's about time for us to have some kind of compromise. I think it's about time. I said to myself, oh, Lord. Miss Baker was right. We shouldn't have done this. But anyway, we still had the last word. Fannie Lou Hamer still got to say, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And the world got to hear it.
Good evening. For those of you that don't know me, I'm former chancellor at Fayetteville State, 12 years. And one of the things I wanted to just comment on a couple things that were said. Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to comment, leave it there, okay, on a couple things that were said by our illustrious speaker, because I lived in D.C. and I was part of some of the things that he mentioned. He mentioned 1968, right? With the riots in D.C. Me and my little crew, we were young teenagers. We had already planned. We bought a lot of our clothes. We jazzy guys from D.C. We bought our clothes at Cavalier's Men's Store on 7th Street. We had planned to go be there for the riots when we knew they were going to break out windows of stores and steal stuff, man, I had my knits all planned, Italian knits that I was going to get from Cavalier Men's Shop, etc. But when I saw what was happening during that riot, I said, this ain't right. And I told my little crew, I said, no, we're not going to steal anything out of any of these stores because this is wrong, what's happening here. I also grew up on right near U Street, before the museum was there. I grew up on U Street, and there was the equivalent to the Harlem Renaissance in New York that you hear about. It was on U Street in D.C., the Lincoln Theater and some other places there in D.C., and I'm 7, 8 years old, 10 years old, walking around looking at these grand cars and well-dressed black people and artists and everyone else on U Street, okay? So sometimes when you don't know history, you don't hear people talk about history. Yeah, I was the chancellor at Fayetteville State. Yeah, I was the first African-American to get a PhD in psychology from Cornell. But look how I started. I started in the streets, no parents. For 12 years, I lived in the streets, U Street, by myself, me and my little crew, all kids with no parents. And yet we made it because there was an elementary school called St. Augustine's, all black nuns, the only order of black nuns I've ever heard of, the Oblate Sisters of Providence out of France. And those nuns made sure that they kept us out of trouble. I'll never forget one evening, it wasn't evening, it was 2 a.m. on a Friday night. I'm on my way up to U Street to see the Harlem Renaissance folks, and all of a sudden, this nun grabs me by the collar. I looked at her, I said, what you doing out here at 2 a.m.? Okay? She said, you haven't done your math homework for 2 weeks. This is a true story. I put my hand on the Bible. She said, you haven't done your math homework for 2 weeks. I said, oh, sister, don't worry about it. I got it covered. Plus, you're embarrassing me in front of my boys. She said, come over here. She had set a card table up under the street lamp with my math homework, a pad, and a pen, and she said, you're going to sit here and do your math homework right now. 2 a.m. Some of the folks that were well-dressed, that were walking along U Street, would stop and look at me and say, little man, why are you doing math homework at 2 a.m. on a Friday night? And I would point to the nun and say, because she said I had to do it, okay? That scene is etched in my mind. It's etched in my mind. I'm writing my memoirs now, by the way, and it's in there, the story of how that evolved. But it was those nuns. There was a gang, the LeDroy Park gang, was the main gang that controlled all of downtown D.C., all of downtown D.C. Nothing happened in downtown D.C. unless the LeDroy Park gang. But the LeDroy Park gang groomed young kids. I was being groomed to be a pimp. Smooth Eddie was the guy who was giving all the young guys who were going to be pimps. And Smooth Eddie would take us up to U Street to show us how the men dressed, how clean they were. And, you know, because he said, when you become a pimp, you're going to have to look like this. All right? And I'll never forget this guy, Smooth Eddie. Everywhere he went, people showed him respect, etc., just because he was the main pimp, grooming the young boys, and he was part of the LeDroy Park gang. So see, there's a big history associated with everything that he's saying, and I know it's true because I'm a little kid, and I was there watching a lot of this stuff related to the riots, 68, related to what was equivalent to, and they had it in Baltimore on Washington Avenue. Baltimore had their equivalent to the Harlem Renaissance. D.C. had their equivalent to the Harlem Renaissance, etc. I don't tell a lot of people this story, but I'm telling it tonight because he's here, and we were talking about the rival high schools that he went to, Eastern High School, and I went to St. John's, and there was a big riot, a football game for the city championship, and it was on the front page of the New York Times. There was a riot, okay? And that's history. So I'm saying to the young folks here, talk to people. Talk to people. You don't talk enough. Young people don't talk enough to older people to find out what went down. See, there are people here that have a history, not only just of Fayetteville, of North Carolina, but other places they came from. You got to talk to these people to know about that history, okay? I just wanted to share that with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor. Do we have anybody else wants to ask a question?
A student.
Thank you. Okay. We got the people on the Zoom. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Dr. Smith, for just taking out the time to even be here. I know that you're a very busy individual from what I hear, and from what I've been hearing here tonight. So I really do appreciate it. I guess I'm going to be quick because just like Mr. John Caldwell said, I can be long and kind of long-winded. And I also as well like to talk, so I'm going to try to keep it real short. So as a student, I'm a senior at Fayetteville State University. One of the things that really, I guess, infatuates me about you is your involvement with SNCC, just being honest with you. And so if you could, I guess, reminisce a little bit about whenever I'm 21, so whenever you was 21, what's something that I guess you would, if you could do it all over again, focus on, I guess, as a student when it comes to not only civil rights, but just getting people more involved with just civic engagement, period. I would really love to hear your insight, so thank you.
Okay, so let me say two things about SNCC. One was that SNCC was a group of people who started working in their local community. I was a student activist at Morehouse College. We organized Spelman and Morris Brown and all those people in Atlanta. We were a local organization, and that was true in Greensboro. The young people there that started the sit-in movement. It was true in Raleigh with Shaw and all these local. And then we all eventually got to know each other because because Ella Baker helped bring us all together. Start that first failed attempt with Dr. King, that didn't stop us because we couldn't meet with him. We met with each other, and so, but first we were active in our own. It was sort of like with the mafia. First you had to prove yourself first before you could be part of SNCC. And I have to be honest with you, I even at the age of 80 now, if somebody in my age range tell me they ain't never picketed, they ain't never marched, they ain't never been in jail, they ain't never smelled no tear gas, what in the world were you doing? I'm suspicious. You might have been a spy or something. I don't have much to say to somebody in my age range because this stuff was everywhere. Every community in the South was in the North too was involved in some kind of demonstration, some kind of you could boycott sitting at home. You could phone somebody and tell them not to shop at the richest department store in Atlanta or somewhere. Everybody could do something with the civil rights movement. And, if you were scared to go downtown and march with a picket sign, you could help us by staying at home and by organizing your neighbors. And there was no truth to that story that got out in the paper in Atlanta that if you came to Richards and shopped during the Christmas holidays when we told you not to shop, that we would snatch your bag. We ain't never snatched nobody's bag. That was the hoodlums that were doing that. They were not a part of our organization. We might have said amen, but we didn't do it ourselves. We were a nonviolent, principled organization. But we had some rules, too. And let me mention one of them, because I mentioned this guy, Charles Sherrod, who's being buried tomorrow, the 15th, in Albany, Georgia. I wrote a little piece about him the other day, and I've said this about Charles Sherrod. A lot of SNCC people were ministers. I was not a minister. My granddaddy was a preacher, and my daddy was the black sheep of the family. I took after him. I'm sorry about that, Reverend, but I'm at the church. I might well tell the truth. Nobody ever thought I was going to be a preacher, except my pastor did say one time I tried to preach from the book of Nehemiah. But we had a lot. Charles Sherrod was a preacher. This guy Charles Jones, that was famous. I think Charles Jones from North Carolina. We had 3 or 4 others. Charles Bevel, Reverend Bevel, John Lewis was in when John Lewis became the SNCC. He was in theology school in Nashville, Tennessee, and but it was the first time I heard this. I realized, and as I searched back through my mind, it came from Charles Sherrod, and that was this. He said, in one of our meetings. These meetings go on all night sometimes. He said, one of those late meetings, he said, all we have is each other. And all we have is each other. We have to commit ourselves to each other. And so here's what he meant by commitment. He said, if one of us goes down or gets put in jail, the rest of us have to bring ourselves and put us in the place where he fell. Now, I was 20 years old. I'm thinking to myself. But when I hear people talk about the greatest generation now, I say to myself, I was in Holly Springs, Mississippi, registering voters, trying to register a few voters without getting killed. Jimmy Travis got shot. One day, they shotgunned it with a grease gun. What the mafia called it a grease gun. It was an automatic weapon in the daytime, right in front of Mississippi Valley State College. They gunned him down. And so SNCC put out the word that all of us had to go to Greenwood. Now, I had never been to Greenwood, Mississippi. Don't know how to get there. But I'm supposed to crank my old raggedy car up and go over there because they have called all of us to go to the place where he fell. Now, that was the most violent place I'd ever been in my life. I didn't realize this till I left there 2 years later. I wrote my mother a letter. I'd written a couple of letters. She saved this one. I told her I didn't think I was going to get out of there alive. I was in Greenwood when Medgar Evers got killed. I was in Greenwood when the children's church was bombed. That church was bombed in Birmingham. We went over there to that funeral. Those 4 girls got killed. I was in Greenwood when Mrs. Hamer was arrested in Winona, Mississippi. I drove the car over to Winona to get her out of jail. So, I mean, look, this stuff takes a little courage now, y'all. Y'all hear me? Sometimes leadership requires courage. You can't lead from the back all the time. Sometimes you're going to have to get out there. But Fannie Lou Hamer said, if you take one step, God will make 2. And let me say that one last thing about Miss Hamer. I was in a church with her one time. Now, you know, as a civil rights worker, there were times when I just didn't want to go to jail. I'm going to tell y'all the truth. I ain't never wanted to go to jail. Anybody who want to go to jail is crazy. I ain't never wanted. And the moment I got in there, I wanted to get out. I ain't never want to go to jail. So I was over there one time in Indianola, Mississippi. We got a church full of people like that all in here. And we getting ready to sing. We singing and getting ready to go march down to the courthouse. Somebody come in there and say, the sheriff got the place surrounded. So Miss Hamer's up here singing Freedom Song. We're getting ready to go. And they got a side door where you can get out of the church, right? So first we got a whole house full, and then after a while we got half a house full. And after a while we got about 12 people left up in there. And 4 of us are civil rights workers. I'm one of those. So Ms. Hamer said, well, we can't turn back now, y'all. We got to march. But the sheriff's out there. Y'all know we're going to get beat up and put in jail. We got to march. So I'm a civil rights leader, and I can't go out that side door like everybody else. But I'm trying to talk Ms. Hamer down. I'm saying, Ms. Hamer, maybe we can pass on this one. She said, oh, no, we got to go, Frank. We got to go. So Ms. Hamer gets up, and she says this, what she says, brother. She said, for all of y'all that's scared, y'all get behind me and my Jesus. We're going to lead y'all out of him. Hey, man, I'm telling you, now you got to go now. I got to go. I can't go out that side door now. I got to go with Miss Hamer, man. We walked out of that room. The sheriff moved outside. We walked right out of there. They didn't touch us. Miss Hamer was singing. Miss Hamer started singing. She would get all sweaty. She started sweating like Marion Barry, man. She started. Hey, man, I was sweating too, but I was sweating because I was scared. Hey, man, they didn't touch none of us. Now, they didn't let us register to vote, but they didn't lock us up. I'm telling you right now, there's some magic in this stuff, y'all. You can't be scared. And I read you those statistics about how this changed this place. I'll tell you one thing, one observation I will share with you that I was born in Georgia. I was finished high school in a segregated school in Georgia, went off to Morehouse College. I went from Morehouse to Mississippi. I've been in the South almost all my life except until I moved to Washington, D.C. When I think about how much change occurred in the South between 1960 and 1968, you get rid of these signs and all this stuff, I have to tell you all, I never thought I would, as a kid coming up in Noonan, Georgia, I was 2 years younger than Emmett Till. And by the way, that movie's coming out called Till. Y'all got to see that. I saw it already. I never thought I'd live to see a day when black kids and white kids went to school together. I never did. I'm growing up in let me tell you something. The life of African Americans was a horrible life that we had to live. We lived under the veil of fear all of our lives. Now, one of the reasons why I could go to Mississippi with SNCC was because I've been living that life all my life. Hey, when I found out, one of the ways I found out I had cancer, I went jogging with some white guys one time, and I couldn't get back. They said, well, how do you know I had cancer? I said, look, outrunning white guys was a survival skill when I was coming up. When I couldn't outrun two white boys, I knew I was sick. I went straight to the doctor. They told me I had cancer, man. I knew I was sick, but I could not. That's how I survived. But we lived a horrible life. I never thought I'd see now. I've got younger brothers and sisters, nephews and nieces who have never gone to a segregated school in Georgia. Don't even know the fear. Don't even know anything about that. They look at me talking about that like I'm an old fuddy-duddy. We can change this world, you all. We can make it better in our lifetime. I know because I have seen it happen in my own lifetime. I've lived it. I know. So you don't have to accept this condition that you don't like just because it's tough and it's hard. You can change it, and it's up to you to change it too. Sometimes I wonder why my folks put up with it so bad. It's okay for parents to question their grandparents. My grandchildren should question me. They should question me. I ought to give an account for myself. I ought to have to give an account for myself. That's right. You're going to have to give an account for yourself too. Why did we let it last? If it took such a little, if so few people got killed trying to change it, why did it take so long? And then when we once got started, we found out there were white people out there who were willing to help us. We couldn't have changed it without help from whites. Obama could not have gotten elected president of the United States. He needed 2 white votes for every black vote he got. He wouldn't have been elected president of the United States. This country has changed. It changed because we changed it. We told people it was all right to change. It was safe to change. It was all right for their kids to go to school with black kids. It was all right. It's all right for them to marry black people if they want to. It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. We all people. We all God's children. We all cut from the same cloth. Ain't but one people. We all made by the same God. It's all right.
Just want to mention real quickly, at his new facility when it opens up, there's going to be a scene where Fannie Lou Hamer is going to sing spirituals, and it's going to be a hologram that the young children can sing with. So you want to see that when it opens up.
Step right into the camera, brother.
Mark is going to teach them how to do the military march, and we're going to teach them how to do the civil rights march.
I just wanted to mention to you all, and I apologize, I forgot to tell you all, but there were 2 men in the 36 from North Carolina that was awarded Congressional Medal of Honor in the Battle of New Market Heights. One of them was James Miles, and another one was Gardner James. So you can find them in the 36th Color Infantry, North Carolina. So I just want to acknowledge that to you all.
I want to know if the first colored infantry, if the soldiers were paid the same as white soldiers.
Not in the beginning. As the color soldiers came in the second half of the war, when they first started off, they didn't receive equal pay as white soldiers. When they turned the tide of the war, by June of 1864, Congress authorized equal pay, and the government ended up giving back pay. So they got more than their fair share.
And Abraham Galloway fought for that, and Abraham Galloway was from here.
Yeah, he was like one of the best Union spies. If y'all heard Harry Jones gave a speech about the 4 L's, about the intelligence network, through these African Americans. They were giving all these Union commanders all the intel what the Confederacy doing in their lines, so they were helping sabotaging the Confederacy supplies and stuff.
Thank you.
You mentioned the ministers that were involved with you in SNCC, and you've mentioned the church. My question to you is, how do you see the church's role today as it played a role then? What about that role now? And leadership of ministers, how do you see that?
His father was one. So.
Repeat the question.
Yes. Thank you. So just wanted to quickly, the question was from our host, Pastor Jamel Johnson, that what does Dr. Frank Smith see as the role of the church and the role of ministers in particular in terms of the work of this long struggle that we've been in for equal rights?
Okay, I think that's good enough for me to end on right there, and I'm glad you brought that up too. Because there's another way of asking me is, what do I see as the future of Black America in the United States, and how do I see these institutions playing a role? The civil rights movement was born out of historically Black colleges. And a lot of those people who were leaders of that movement were ministers. They were studying theology in school. I was not one of them. I was on the other side of the track, but but I followed them. I heard what they said. I repeated those words from Charles Sherrod. I don't know if any other SNCC remembered those words. I remembered them. They laid heavy on my heart for all these many years. And they were resurrected when I heard he had passed away, because he was the one that I heard that from for the first time. And so one, I think that we will always need historically Black colleges. And I've been wrestling with this because I also believe in integration. I know we Black people have to. I know the hurt and the harm and the violence that comes from racial segregation. I lived that. I don't ever want anybody to have to live that again. So I think, and I think I think integration is good for Black people and white people. We just like white people. If we're not around them, we start making up stories about them, the same way they make stories up about us. And this world is full of Black and white people. When you leave here, you look at the world. You got Africa. What do you got out there? You got Africa, the largest continent in the world is Africa, and then you got Asia, and you got India. When you add all those people up, the world is mostly colored. You see what I'm saying? So we got to learn how to get along. Because if we don't learn how to get along, as Dr. King says, as friends, we're going to perish as fools. And that's why I'm worried about that thing over there in Ukraine. These people talking about nuclear weapons like they talking about shooting a shotgun. Man, you can shoot a shotgun up and it don't hit nobody. And if you hit somebody, they can sit around and pull the bullets out themselves if they want to, unless they got buckshot in there. But these nuclear weapons, they kill everybody. Ain't gonna be no world after that. They talking about Armageddon. We got to learn how to get along. So that's the first thing. The second thing is this, and this goes directly to the church. We not only came out of the church, my granddad was a preacher, but all those meetings that we held in the South were held in churches. The church was the only thing we owned. We couldn't meet we couldn't meet nowhere. It was the only thing we owned. If we didn't have no church, we wouldn't have no meeting place. And not now. Let me say one last thing about this, Reverend. You know, sometimes the preacher wasn't saved either. Y'all know that, right? I said the preacher wasn't saved either. I tell people I'm a trustee. God ain't through with me yet. He wasn't through with some of these preachers either. I'll tell you a quick story. Down in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, we organized now. We got a whole the best job of organizing I did in my life was in Hattiesburg. I did block by block by block by block. We knew somebody in every block. I used that to get elected to the D.C. City Council, by the way. That's how I got elected for 16 years, getting block by block by block. I learned that in Mississippi. We get through organizing. Where we going to meet? We're going to meet at this church. we go talk to the minister. The minister said, oh, no, y'all ain't finna get my church burnt down. You ain't holding no mass meeting at my church. So I go back and find a couple of these people on the deacon board. I said, well, you know what they said to me? He don't run no church. We run this church. We gonna meet him whether he want to be here or not. We had to save him, Reverend. He wasn't saved yet. So we had to organize the whole church before we got to him. He was the last one. When he finally found out we were going to be there with a whole house full of people, Fannie Lou Hammond going to be up there singing We Shall Overcome, he was the first one up in there. Somebody need to pray. First we need to pray for him. So some of the preachers haven't been saved either. But the church was the backbone, and it still is the backbone of the community. And let me just say finally, Morehouse College started out in the church. Howard University started out in the church. I went to my first school in my life for 4 years in the St. John Baptist Church School. Now they called it a church. But at St. John Baptist, we only had church every second and fourth Sunday. I went to school every day. And then I had to go to Sunday school. Hey, St. John was a school that just happened to have a church attached to it. We started our life out in the church. So we don't want to ever give up the bridges that brought us safely over. We need these historically black colleges. Don't ever stop giving your money, sending your kids to these schools. And secondly, we got to keep our churches because we don't know what might happen. This thing might come around on us again. We may have to be out here organizing and protesting and marching. And we can count on the church. We can count on the people there because they believe. Fannie Lou Hamer believed. I told my minister this in Washington, D.C. I know some people who believed in God. I know some people who walked out on faith. I walked out with them when all we had was the faith that God was going to protect us. Because if we didn't have that, first of all, we would have been scared. And secondly, we probably would have been dead, quite honestly. Yeah, but I think some of these people were scared of Fannie Lou. It was scared of us. We started singing. If you start singing We Shall Overcome and you marching on the mob back up and let you alone. They don't know what you might do. Man, we start singing and speaking in tongue and looking all crazy. You better let us alone because I don't know what I might do. You don't know either. So, yeah, it has importance. I think if I didn't say anything else in my life, I say this to my wife, to my kids, my grandchildren, we have to protect our churches. You need some kind of organization. I said this to you earlier about college. You need to join some kind of group. There's some things you can do by yourself, but you can't do much by yourself. If all you do in life is what you do by yourself, you're not going to do much. I'll tell you that right now. But if 2 and 2 and 50 make $1 million, you can change something. And you need some way to get those people organized. And that church is the best place to do it, and school is the best place to train them. And those two things came together. They were birthed. The church and the school were birthed together in the black community, and they need to stay together now. Thank you.
We had another question. Someone asked, Demetrius wanted you to speak on Bob Moses real quickly. Bob Moses was instrumental, so I'm going to pass the mic back to you.
Well, if Ella Baker was the spiritual leader who thought, I think Ella saw us a long time before we ever saw ourselves as a group and as an organization. Bob Moses was the opposite. He was a guy who was so committed personally and individually that he could, I mean, what he would say, well, when Bob came to, he recruited me personally from Atlanta when I was chairman of the Atlanta Civil Rights Movement. He knew I had gone through a bad situation over there. They had after the best boycott the Civil Rights Movement ever saw, Dr. King, Daddy, and the people of Atlanta had signed an agreement I hated, and I made it known I was going to put the picket line back up, and they treated me bad. So Bob said, "Why don't you come to Mississippi with me?" So Bob shows up. Bob had tried to make a citizen's arrest of somebody in Ruleville, not in Ruleville, but in Macomb, Mississippi, who had denied some lady the right to vote. So he was going to make a citizen's arrest on the voter registrar. Now that'll get you killed. They didn't even put Bob in jail. They just beat the heck out of him and threw him out on the street. They figured he was too crazy to go to jail. So they beat him up real bad. And so Bob decided he had to recruit some people to come back to Mississippi to go full time. And basically what he said was, and it was right after that that this man got killed at the, Mr. Lee got killed at the, got shot down at a cotton gin. So Bob came to me and had this patch on his head. And he said, you know, I need you to come over. I'm looking for full-time organizers to go to Mississippi to work in the civil rights movement. And I said, I'll think about it. And so he came back through there and he said, you told me you were going. I said, okay, I'll go for the summer. It was in June. So I went over the summer. And so, so when school started back in the fall, it was my junior year, so I came back to go to school. And when I got back to school, somebody sent, now Bob said he didn't send this to me, but I think he did do this. Somebody sent me a newspaper article about a man who had been killed and he had been dismembered. His body's limbs were cut off, and he was dropped in the river in a sack. So somebody sent this to me and said, this is what happened when civil rights workers go and get involved with these local people and leave them by themselves. So Bob said, we have to stay with these people. We can't just go and get them to do something and leave. So now, that's the story of Bob Moses. This guy was so personally committed that he could convince people like me and others. And in this book called Hands on the Freedom Plow, the ladies who write the story about women who want my ex-wife, former wife Jean, is one of the people who wrote this book. But this is not her. One of the ladies who writes in this book says, the class of the SNCC field secretaries was in Mississippi. Well, we were the class of the SNCC field secretaries because of Bob Moses. He was a quiet-spoken, self-effacing guy who had actually gone to Harvard Law School. Not Harvard Law. He had been to Harvard Graduate School in math, too. He was a genius. But he was somebody who talked to local people like, you know, me and others, and he could convince people. He convinced that man that got killed at the cotton gin to register to vote. And he was in the house with him. And then he went down to try to arrest that registrar who wouldn't let him register to vote. He was an amazing guy. And he died a few years ago. He was older than I didn't realize this. He was 10 years older than I was. But he was a wonderful man. He was a wonderful. We had some real leaders in the civil rights movement days. We found each other really in song and in prayer and on the battlefields and in jailhouses. And it was a wonderful time. And I know, because I now have children who have children, that this generation has not seen anything like that they could commit themselves to and see some progress. But I will tell you this, when we were going through it, we didn't know that it was going to be. This is sort of what happens, I guess, with those of us who believe in God, that you believe. That's what I think faith is. It's belief without knowing. It's belief without realization. You just believe. And you believe it can happen, and it can be good, that something good can happen. And I think that's what it is. That's what it is. And so we were able to find each other and work together for a long time, for 7 or 8 years. Not really that long, from 1960 to 1970. 10 years. We changed this country. We changed it forever. We got the Civil War got 3 amendments to the Constitution. The Civil Rights Movement got 2 acts passed. The 64 Civil Rights Act that banned employment discrimination, and the Civil Rights Voting Rights Act, the 65 Voting Rights Act. The 65 Voting Rights Act sent voter registrars into Mississippi. They took our list that we used to register voters. They went down and registered all those people to vote. And when I left Mississippi in 1968, there was over 100,000 black people registered to vote. When you go back to Mississippi today, Mississippi has more black elected officials than any state in the union. The mayor of the largest city in Mississippi, Jackson, y'all saw him in the news a few days ago. His name is Lumumba. That's the largest city in the state of Mississippi. Every major city, Greenwood, Greenville, places where I was, black sheriffs in places where I would have been scared to go in the old days. We can make something happen, you all, worthwhile. We can make it happen. And then I read all those results about increase in voter registration, increase in college enrollment, increase in income. We've made a difference. The income in the black community now is over $3 trillion. That is greater than the GNP of Canada. The earnings in the black community today is greater than the GNP of Canada. We are a country within a country. Now, we're going to figure out how to turn that money over more times in the black community. That's one of your challenges right there. Figure out more time how to turn it around more time. But we on the battlefield. We're on the right road now. We're headed in the right direction. We're going to keep going in that right direction because, I say it again, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice.
Can we give Marquette Milton, Mr. Marquette Milton, a hand also? And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that this evening was sponsored by the North Carolina Youth and College Division of the NAACP. And we have the advisor and the president of that organization. Ms. Speller, could you stand up for a moment? That's the president. And Ms. McNeil, could you stand up for a moment? She's the advisor. Also helping to sponsor, Mr. Peter Greer from Greater Diversity News, and his wife, and his wife, and his wife. Come on, Kathy, please. And his wife, they come in a pair. And we had some other local sponsors, and I want to thank Demetrius Haddock, River Jordan Council for African American Heritage. He's also was a sponsor. And then I'd be remiss if I did not thank Pastor Jamel Johnson from the Mount Sinai Missionary Baptist Church. Thank you for hosting this. And last but not least, he's also allowed us to bring, from the History Center, to bring in what you see on both walls, which Demetrius spoke about. Please tell your neighbors, friends, people that are against this project, people that are for this project, people that are on the fence, ask them to come here, come and make their comments. There's comment sections. We want to have this all filled up. It's going to be here through to Sunday. Is that right, Pastor? So he said Saturday and Sunday for y'all on the Zoom, Saturday and Sunday, 1 to 5. Saturday and Sunday, 1 to 5. Come up here, see what's the design part of it, the content part, and give feedback. Tell us what we need to hear as far as our scholars who are working on this so they can make this thing the best thing. This is what's the planning part of it. And that last panel, if y'all get a chance to look, that last panel on the end tells you the timeline. So we're in the early parts. If you see that mark, the first mark, it says we're here. That's the arc of this planning. So we're in the early stages still yet, even though this has been an ongoing project for quite some years. And come back to the church. Downstairs is a history center for the museum itself. I mean, for the church. I'm saying the museum. I'm sorry. For the church. And it's an excellent way of learning the story of this church and its roots. If you go through and look at it, when we were here on Tuesday, some of us went down there and saw it, and I would love that if some people could go and look at it. There's a lot of work to that. Now I'm going to hand it back, Mike, over. Thank y'all for your time. Thank you. Give yourselves a round of applause.
And once again, I want to thank you all for coming out. We're going to close out in prayer, and who better to do that than our host, Pastor Jamel Johnson.
Father God, we thank you for all that our eyes have seen tonight and all that our ears have heard. We thank you, Lord, for the blessing of this great voice and this great history of Frank Smith. We thank you for his life and how he has poured it out to us this evening and how he has poured it out over the 80 years of his existence. We pray, Lord, for the future works that you have for him to do. Give him the strength and the mindset to get it done, and supply him, Lord, with the people that he needs to still complete his work. And then the rest of us who are here, give us the strength, the help, the wherewithal, the knowledge to continually be engaged. Help us to have the courage that he talked about this evening to be involved. We love you, we bless you, and we certainly thank you for all that you have done for us. In Jesus' name, amen.